All right, good afternoon, guys. Thank you for attending. This is one of the last few sessions of Synergy, so I want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to actually attend. My name is Mo. I'm actually one of the escalation engineers for all of our networking products, which is going to be the NetScaler ADC, ADM, and SD-WAN. Just so we can get the verbiage out of the way, the old names, NetScaler, I'm going to use it. I've been with Citrix long enough, so it's stuck in my head. ADM was formerly NMAS, probably going to use that inevitably also. And SD-WAN, I'm good at calling it SD-WAN at this point. So let's go ahead and start. So the presentation today is going to be deploying Citrix ADM for an enterprise environment. So when I started at Citrix, I actually started off as a frontline engineer. So obviously frontline, you're fielding calls from customers, working cases, and one of the things that I learned working in frontline is you have to set expectations. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm actually going to try to set the expectation that I'll do my best to convey the information to you as best as I can based on the amount of time that I have. I may not be able to go into as much depth or answer all the questions. We do have access to the product managers for the product, so if in the off chance that I'm not able to answer it, they'll be able to field the questions for us. So let's jump in. So obviously, if you've heard of the product, you know a little bit about it. If you haven't, probably the first question you're going to ask is what is ADM? So the easiest way for me to answer this, besides getting into the actual technical components, et cetera, is to actually describe how I use the product. So you may not realize this, but I'm actually the Citrix admin for one of the most complex, convoluted, and dynamic environments in Citrix. It's actually my Citrix lab. It's a rough world in there. Right now, I'm running a clustered environment with 3 active clusters for Citrix NetScaler ADCs. I'm running several HA pairs, several standalone nodes, and that's just my ADC infrastructure. In addition to that, I have a server infrastructure with a domain controller, Exchange server, storefront, etc. I put a lot of work into my lab, and I'm pretty proud of it. I use it to test things. So as a customer, you call in, you have an issue. What I'll do is I'll actually take it, throw it in my lab. That way I can determine, are you hitting a bug? Are you hitting a config issue? Or are you hitting something that's expected behavior? So debugging things, what will typically happen is I'll get a case on Monday, I'll start debugging it, I'll put it in my lab, try to reproduce it. In addition to me having access to my lab, other engineers at Citrix have access to my lab, other engineers on both the escalation and on the frontline teams. So I'll debug things, they'll debug things. At the end of the week, things aren't the way they should be working. What will happen is I'll expect to log into my NetScaler ADCs and I should see this. But come Friday, things have changed, folks have tested things, and instead I'm seeing something like this. And we're actually lucky that the image is in the correct position. There are many times where the image is actually inverted and the username and password fields are to the left or completely off the screen. So what do? I actually use ADM for this particular use case. So with Citrix ADM, you can actually create configuration jobs. The configuration jobs, what they do is I create a static config for each one of my NetScalers and in my environment. And I also have a firmware that I want all of my nodes to be on. Using a configuration job, I'm able to actually push out the static config to my nodes, and I'm also either able to upgrade or downgrade to the node to the build that I want it to be on. So at the end of the week, when things aren't working, the job runs on Saturday or Sunday, depending on when I have it scheduled. Come Monday morning, I log back in, everything is back to the way it was. That's just one of the use cases for how I use the product. But let's go ahead and set the agenda for what we're going to try to accomplish today. So we're obviously going to go over the basics for ADM. We're going to discuss some of the common deployment types, touch on some of the best practices for installation and upgrades, but the best practices for installation and upgrades they're fluid. They will have an impact on ADM, but you can also use some of these things for other ADCs in your environment. We're going to go ahead and touch briefly on pool licensing, discuss the SSL Dashboard specific to expired SSL certificates, and we're also going to talk about some common troubleshooting scenarios that we've dealt with. So Citrix ADM, let's go ahead and just jump into what that is. So obviously the product is going to be a solution for managing your Citrix deployments. That includes your ADCs, your gateways, your SD-WANs, anything that's deployed on-prem or in the cloud. It's going to give you the opportunity to actually manage, monitor, and troubleshoot your entire global infrastructure from a single unified pane. It's going to provide you the capabilities to quickly set up, deploy, manage application delivery with rich analytics. It's going to give you insight into the health of your infrastructure, but also give you insight into what's happening with your user-side traffic. Things like ICA, RTT, bandwidth consumption, things like that. Why use ADM? So obviously, to gain visibility into your infrastructure, virtual apps, desktops, users. Reduce the operational costs using things like automated jobs. In addition to operational costs, most of us, I'm sure, have changed Windows at 2 in the morning. In IT, waking up at 2 in the morning to work on upgrading a server, work on deploying a load balancer, things like that, it's painful because you'll start at 2 and you may not finish until the next day because you have to test everything, make sure it works. Using something like configuration jobs takes care of it for you. You'll get an email or an alert in your Slack channel. It's done. Simplify SSL certificate management. Now this is a huge one because of the dashboard. I'll show you what it works or how it works because it'll definitely save you some time. And again, it's going to give you insight into your ADC infrastructure and functionality. So common deployment types for Citrix ADM. So we're going to have 3 of them. Simplest one is going to be the standalone deployment. Very, very simple. It's going to be a single server. Everything is integrated into that single server. We're also going to have an HA deployment. So each one of these deployments is going to be directly dependent on the size of your infrastructure and what you're trying to accomplish with the product, how much the analytics mean to you, et cetera. So obviously with an HA, if any of you are familiar with an ADC, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have a primary and a secondary node. And you're also going to be utilizing a floating IP to communicate to the node. Third deployment type is going to be disaster recovery. It's going to be an HA deployment, but in addition to that, you're going to have a third node, a standalone node, sitting at a disaster recovery site. In the off chance that the host for your primary node goes down, the host for your secondary node goes down, you still have your DR node that you can actually push traffic to, get your data back. One of the things with ADM is currently vMotion is not supported for Citrix ADM. So looking at the standalone node, simplest deployment. When you're doing a standalone node, everything for the initial deployment of Citrix ADM is actually going to be done via the CLI. So there's a deployment script that you're going to run. What you'll do is you'll actually go in there and you'll actually, for a standalone node, you select the single server option. The database for the standalone node is integrated and consolidated into that one single instance. And for the deployment script, you go ahead and run it. With an HA deployment, what's going to happen is obviously you're going to have a primary and a secondary node in the pair. The primary node is really going to be the node that's going to be accessible. You can actually use the management IP for the ADM to get into the primary node, or you can actually use the floating IP to actually get into it. The synchronization between the databases between the primary and secondary node happens by physical replication, and the database itself on the secondary node is going to be in a read replica mode. For HA to function, one of the keys here is you have to actually have the ports open. There has to be a clear line of communication with respect to the heartbeats for HA to actually function. You also need port 5454 for database synchronization and also 22. Disaster recovery. If your infrastructure needs to run ADM in disaster recovery, you're looking, again, at 2 nodes, HA, and then obviously the third node. The key with disaster recovery is currently it's a manual process. So in the off chance that primary site goes down, both the nodes in the primary site goes down, what you would actually have to do is you would have to go to the standalone node and you would run the script on the screen, and this would actually allow it to start getting the analytics. It won't actually pick up traffic until you run the script. If you're doing a multi-data center deployment, what's going to happen is you'll actually have your primary data center with your Citrix ADM infrastructure built out, whether it's going to be a standalone HA or a DR deployment. In addition to that, say you have a second data center. Instead of putting an entire AD infrastructure in that data center, you can actually use the agents. The agent it's a smaller install, and all it's going to do is it's actually going to send data to ADM. So you're still going to be able to get the analytics, but in addition to the actual agent, there's yet another option. On the ADC itself, there's something called an inbuilt agent. The caveat to using the inbuilt agent is a lot of the web insight, security insight, HEX insights not included when using the inbuilt agent on the ADC itself. With the Citrix ADM product, by default, it has 120 gigs of space. Depending on the size of your infrastructure, it may be necessary to bump that up. You can actually, for a single server deployment, you can add one disk. For HA, you're actually going to need to add a disk for each node in the pair to obviously have a reciprocal node for functionality. Now, there are some deployments out there that are still using what we call legacy products. That's going to be Citrix Command Center and Citrix Insight Center. With ADM, it actually gives you the opportunity to migrate your infrastructure from Insight Center and Command Center to ADM. So instead of having to completely rebuild, add all the nodes and do all the tasks, etc., you can actually go ahead and do the migration process. If you're using an older revision of, say, Command Center and you're running something below 5.248.2, you'll actually need to upgrade first, and then you can actually run the migration to ADM. And again, communication between Command Center and ADM is going to be Nitro-based, so you want a clear line of communication with respect to the ports and protocols to allow the migration to function. So upgrading ADM, and again, I initially prefaced that this slide is with ADM, but it can also be, some of the thought processes here can actually be applied to the NetScaler ADC product. So upgrading ADM, it's a very simple process. You simply log in, go to System Administration. On the right side of the screen, you see the upgrade box. You hit the upgrade box. It's going to take you to where you can actually select the software image. Same principle as an ADC. You'll go ahead and you can download the image that you want to upgrade to. Go ahead and hit OK. And the upgrade process begins. The caveat with upgrading ADM is it's a process that actually requires patience. So in theory, say your username and password are NSRoot. Those are the default credentials for the product. Obviously, I'm hoping you change your credentials from NSRoot to something else. But there are many instances where you actually run the upgrade on ADM, and you have a large infrastructure, you have a large database, you have a lot going on the node. After about 10 or 15 minutes, you notice that you can't log in. It looks like the upgrade went through successfully, but you still can't log in. You try NSRoot over and over and over again, and you still can't log in. Inevitably, you get frustrated. You open a case with support. Support gets on the phone, and the first thing we do, we try to log in. All of a sudden, it works. Typically, it's not something you were doing wrong. It's going to be a subsystem was probably slow in starting, and the amount of time you waited to call support, waited on the phone with support, got someone on, subsystem started up, you were able to actually log in. So upgrading in an HA deployment, you can upgrade accessing either the active node in the load balancing pair. And again, the upgrade depends on the size of your infrastructure, the speed of links, and the size of the database. And after the upgrade and the secondary starts, you should continue to actually get data. In the off chance that you're running the upgrade and you feel like it's hung or you feel like something is not happening that it should, these are some of the logs that you can actually look at on ADM itself to see what's going on with the upgrade, to see if it's successful, if it's failing, if you need to open a case with support and find out what's going on. With ADM, once you initiated the upgrade and you're not seeing any type of progress, you want to try to avoid restarting the node. You got to keep in mind that the product is database driven, so if you restart the node during an upgrade, you restart the node during a maintenance, you could potentially corrupt the database. One of the key points with doing the upgrade is backups. We'll jump into that in a second. But again, as I was previously stating, logging into NSRoot while the upgrade is still running, It's not going to work. So best practices for the upgrade. So Citrix ADM, Citrix ADC, they give you the opportunity to create a backup. They actually give you the opportunity to create a backup on the node itself. One of the big things that we've actually seen is folks will actually log into the product, run the backup, and then do whatever maintenance they have to do, upgrade, database maintenance, add, remove app flow policies, etc. One of the things that they fail to do is actually download the backup. So you run the backup on the node itself, you hit the backup and restore button, you create a backup, you do everything, all of a sudden something happens while you're working on it. You can't get back in. Where's the backup? It's on the node. What happened? You didn't download the backup. So the backup does you no good. So when you do the backup on the ADM and also on the ADC, and again, I'd like to expand that to both nodes, or both products, if you're going to do the backup on the node itself, download the backup to a jump box, download the backup to your laptop, wherever it is. But in addition to that, ADM obviously is a virtualized product if you're doing the on-prem deployment. If you have ADM in VMware, Hyper-V, Xen server, in addition to doing the backup on the node itself, back it up on your hypervisor. Create a clone, create a checkpoint, create a snapshot. I'm not saying something is going to go wrong, but my thought process being in IT for this long is always err on the side of caution. I've learned to work smart as opposed to work hard, and thus far it seemed to work out. All upgrades should be done from the GUI. It can be done from the CLI for a standalone node. It should really be avoided for an HA build-out because it will create issues. But again, the product itself was designed to be GUI-driven. With the exception of the initial deployment, everything else should be done from the GUI. Expect that the upgrade is going to take a few minutes, and try to be patient. So let's go ahead and jump into one of the features. So pooled licensing. So pooled licensing in the ADM, it's a licensing framework that comprises of a common bandwidth and instance pool that's actually hosted and served by ADM. The easiest way to think of this is you throw your license, you throw your bandwidth, your total bandwidth in a giant pool, and then you obviously add your ADC infrastructure to ADM. What's going to happen is that the ADCs are able to check out a license as it needs it and check out as much bandwidth as it needs it. In the off chance that you have 5 nodes that are added to ADM and the bandwidth usage is fluid, it changes over time, it can actually check in and then check back out bandwidth over time as it needs it. From this common pool, again, each ADC instance in your data center, regardless of its actual platform or form factor, this is going to include things obviously like in your virtual infrastructure, Hyper-V, Xen server, but also on SDXs and MPXs are going to be able to check out the license. It's not actually going to be bound to the host ID as it previously was. The license file is going to be, again, not bound. And when the resources are no longer needed, they're able to go back into the pool and be available to another node. So for pool licensing, the key here is it's going to give you the opportunity to actually maximize your bandwidth utilization. It's going to ensure that instances are not allocated bandwidth in excess of their requirements. The ability of an ADC to actually check out licenses and bandwidth in and out of the pool also enables you to automate instance provisioning. You can increase or decrease the bandwidth allocated to an instance at running time without actually impacting customer-side traffic. And you can transfer licenses in the pool from one node to another. So one of the other features, and this is probably one of the cooler features, besides the configuration job, is going to be the SSL Dashboard. So working in Frontline, one of the easiest and more common calls that we would get would be a Sev1 where the administrator wakes up in the morning and his entire infrastructure is down. No one can log in. No one obviously is able to launch desktops. Everything works if you're bypassing the ADC, and you're going directly to storefront, but obviously bypassing the ADC and going directly to storefront, security issue. What happened is that at midnight the night before, typically it happens almost always at midnight the night before, certificates expired. What we normally see is the guy that works on the ADC today may not be the guy that worked on it 2 years ago when the certificate was purchased. It may be they didn't even document the fact that the certificate was purchased or is expiring. The cert expires at midnight. You as the administrator, you weren't aware of it. You log in, nothing is working. You call support, and I've gotten these calls. One of them I distinctly remember. I actually got the call while my computer was rebooting. I spoke to the customer, and I was actually able to fix the issue while my computer was rebooting because that's how common of an issue it is. Using the ADM dashboard for SSL completely removes that. So if you take a look at the screen here, obviously we're going to have to go the long way. So right now we're at networks, you're going to go to SSL Dashboard. But if you look at the center of the screen where it actually says certificates, you'll notice the number 1 under expired. Easiest thing to do is you got one cert that's expired, you actually click on the number 1, it's going to take you to the cert and it's going to give you the opportunity to update the cert at that time. But let's go the long way. So we're going to go to networks, we're going to go to SSL Dashboards. This is the actual SSL dashboard. You can actually see the certs that are expiring now, certs expiring in a week, 30 days, etc. You go ahead and you click on expired, and again, it'll take you to the cert. In this case, the cert that I actually installed was named expired for this example. So you go ahead and you just check the box, and this is going to take you to the update certificate option. Go ahead and select the current version of the cert you need to update. So one of the things that I actually did with testing for these is I set up a Slack channel. So instead of having to get email alerts, I was actually able to get updates about what the product was doing in my Slack channel. So for some reason, in this case, the cert expired. I kept getting alerts in the Slack channel. It was expired. The second I updated it, I got alerts that it was updated. So it gave me the opportunity to actually streamline a lot of my things. Where I use Slack a lot, I was able to actually see updates from the product in Slack. So let's go ahead and talk about troubleshooting a couple of common issues in ADM. So from the standpoint of support, whenever you as a customer, you have an issue, what will happen is you'll call into support, and then support is going to ask for a support file. Support file has got a lot of stuff in it, and we have to look at all the logs on the product. So the first log is going to be the control log. This is actually going to initialize, actually give us information about initialized monitors and other processes and the database. It's actually responsible for restarting processes and subsystems if it fails. The other process, or the other log rather, is going to be the service. This is going to be for API requests. Third log is going to be the inventory log. This is where we're going to get a lot of information about what's happening, because this is going to give us information about the inventory with respect to your ADM or your ADCs and your SD-WANs, etc. This actually runs a complete inventory every 30 minutes by default, and it gathers things like statistics about CPU, memory, etc. The mass config log is going to provide us process configuration requests, and it gets that it gets from the service processes. The events log is going to trigger internal events en masse and actually also reporting and syslog data. The data collector log is going to be for SNMP traps. And the next two logs, the AF decoder and the AF analytics, are going to be for app flow issues. Perf log is going to be for performance statistics. And CLI log is going to be for CLI statistics. So once we've dug into logs, we're able to kind of figure out what's going on the node and provide a recommendation with respect to a resolution. So the no data issue. So if you guys, I assume, have ran ADM or Insight Center or Command Center at one point, common scenario is you add your instance, you add your ADC to ADM, everything is set up correctly, you're able to maybe get statistics on the node itself, you're able to see memory, you're able to see CPU usage, but you can't see anything about your users. You're not getting any feedback on who's logging in, what desktops are being launched, you have no idea what's happening. With respect to the no data issue, we've actually come up with an easier way to troubleshoot that. There's actually an inbuilt diagnostic for no data, and it's actually going to give you analytics or provide you information about why you're not getting analytics or statistics from the ADC. So let's take a look at the no data dashboard. So when you run the actual diagnostic, it'll give you, in my case, 4 reasons. If you're looking at there, it's saying that there are issues with the collectors, there are issues with licenses, as to why I'm not getting any data. The actual diagnostic runs by default every 12 hours, and it generates a diagnostic report for issues that are found specific to analytic features. The diagnostic report provides the sources of the issue, the types of the issue, and corrective actions that you can actually take to address them. If one of the common issues that we've seen is where app flow is misconfigured. So when you deploy ADM and you actually want to start getting analytics, you deploy app flow. The correct place to be deploying app flow is going to be from ADM itself. If you're not getting any data, take a look at where you deployed app flow. Did you actually log into the ADC and script out the app flow policy yourself? Probably not the best way to do that. Go ahead and go back into actual ADM, and you can actually go to analytics, and you can push out an app flow policy and go ahead and pick which gateways, load balancers, et cetera, you need to get app flow data on. The troubleshooting and no data issue, we always try to start off with the simplest things. So all the config for app flow, again, must be done, or really should be done on ADM. It should not be done on the ADC. Start looking at things like the ports. Make sure the correct ports are open to determine why, or are we not getting any data to ADM from the ADC. When I'm troubleshooting a no data scenario, what I like to do is I like to streamline what I'm looking at. So instead of looking at an entire collector file from ADC and ADM to see what's happening, I like to trim that down a little bit. So what I'll typically do is on the ADC itself, I'll go ahead and I'll log and I'll create a new directory. So I'll go into var, I'll create a support_testing directory. And what I like to do is one of the logs that I like to look at is for the hits. So if I'm not getting any data, are the app flow policies even being hit? So I'll go ahead and I'll run an nscon command to actually generate, so I can log hits, and what I'll do is I'll actually output that to the directory that I created, so I just have 2 or 3 minutes to look at instead of a full collector file. In addition to that, you can actually do this with your log files. So you can run this against your nitro logs, ns.log, messages, HTTP error logs, HTTP access logs. Pretty much every log on the ADC and ADM you can go ahead and run this against, and you're going to get a small subset of the logs instead of a huge span, so it's easier to kind of focus in. One of the other things that we like to look at for a no data scenario on the ADM is, are we getting traffic? The easiest way to do that is go ahead and run a trace on ADM to see if that's what's keeping us back as far as getting analytics. So obviously ADM being database driven, every now and again the database actually needs to be maintained. Previous to this, what would happen is you would have to call support if you were having what would be considered a database issue. Support would have to debug it, determine if it is a database issue, and then we would have to, a lot of processes would have to be ran through to get a resolution. Now with ADM, there's actually an inbuilt database script that allows you to do a lot of this maintenance yourself. So the database can actually become corrupt over time. It'll actually grow and create space issues. This can cause issues with logging into the CLI or logging into the GUI. So let's go ahead and take a look at the database maintenance tool. So the database maintenance tool itself, it's actually only ran from the CLI. One of the cool things that I like about it is it does look like an old school video game if you guys are familiar with them. You'll go ahead and log into the shell for ADM. You go to the MPS directory, go ahead and mass_recovery, and then you'll run the script. So once you run the script, again, everything is CLI driven. So Once this actually goes through, it'll actually provide you with what is eating up space and provide you direction into what you can and can't delete to potentially clear up the space. So here we can see what analytics is doing, perf reports, etc. So one of the options there is going to be the system catalog. So Citrix ADM includes user tables known as the system catalog. The system catalog is actually a location in ADM databases where it's a relational database management system stores. Things like schema metadata, such as information about tables and columns and internal records. The tables in the system catalog are like regular tables, and they can accumulate and inflate over time, creating dead rows, and therefore, eventually it needs periodic cleanup. When you, or if you need to use the database maintenance tool, one of the keys here is you don't want to actually do anything that interrupts it, because you are manipulating the database at this point, so anything that interrupts it, the node shutting down, losing access, etc., can actually create a corruption and corrupt all of your data. So this goes back to one of the things that I actually indicated about doing the upgrades and maintenance on the node. Create a backup, create a snapshot, create a checkpoint, just in case. So let's go ahead, and I initially opened with how I use the product to actually automate things. So let's take a look at what you can actually do when you're automating something on ADM. So what this automation demo is going to show you, it's actually, we're going to be installing a certificate, we're going to be creating a load balancer, we're going to bind the cert, and then deploy that to another ADC. My thought process in doing this was, in theory, say you have an environment that you have 40 or 50 certs. What I wanted to do is, if you obviously you have to go through and pick the specific cert you need on the ADC, it kind of decreases the potential for actually using automation. So what I did is I logged into my ADC, I created a subdirectory in the SSL directory, and I threw all my certs in there. All I did for ADM was point to one of the 40 certs that I wanted to use. That way, in the off chance you need to use another cert down the road, all the certs are in one single spot, so it's a little easier to work with. So let's go ahead and jump in. So here, what I'm doing is I'm logging into my NetScaler ADC. We're going to go ahead and go to shell. So all the certs are stored in the nsconfig SSL directory. So if you create a subdirectory in SSL called certs, you can point to that. If you create a subdirectory anywhere else and you put your certs, you're not going to be able to point to it. So let's go ahead and go to the directory. And we're going to create our certs directory. So using WinSCP, what I did is I went ahead and I dropped the cert that I was going to use in. And again, if you have 40 certs, you can actually throw them all in this directory, and it's just going to act as a container. What we're going to do is here we're going to log into actually ADM. We're going to go ahead and go to networks. And if you're looking at where it says instances, you can see that I actually have 2 nodes added. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the build out on one node, and I'm going to deploy it to the other node. So we're going to go to configuration jobs, and we're actually going to open up the configuration templates. We're going to go ahead and create a new template. And in this case, I'm just going to create a load balancer, add a cert. The template I named was test_LB. And one of the cool features is the record and play option. So what this will do is, if you choose the record and play option, it'll actually send you to one of the ADCs that you have added in ADM. And it'll actually record all the keystrokes. So the second that I hit record, it sends me over to my VPX 1000, my NetScaler ADC VPX 1000. So once I get to my ADC, that's where I'm actually going to start pushing through my commands. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and install a certificate. Traffic management, SSL, going to go to certs. Going to go to server certs. Going to hit install. And again, my naming convention, not complicated. So I'm using a PFX file. So obviously that's going to be the same cert key. Password, I think, was probably NSRoot. So obviously you can see the certs installed on the ADC. I'm going to go to traffic management, go to load balancing, go to virtual servers. And I'm going to create a virtual server. It's obviously going to be SSL 443, non-routable IP, just to test. I'm going to go ahead and point to my cert. So I have a load balancer built out. I have a certificate installed and bound to the load balancer. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to ADM. I'm going to hit stop. And you'll notice it actually generated 22 commands. So the number itself is incorrect. The commands that I was actually using is going to be 8, but I wanted to leave the other commands in there because when I was actually running the demo, there were a lot of things that I actually had to do to clean things up. I had a lot of test load balancers, a lot of other certificates that I needed to remove. So I wanted to leave all the commands in there because it actually shows you how you can modify the commands to automate your deployment. So if you need to change the IP address, if you need to change the name, etc., you can do all that from ADM. So we're going to go ahead and drag all those commands over. And again, you're going to see all 22, a lot of removing and unbinding things. I'm going to only trim this down to the relevant commands. So it's going to be me adding the load balancer, adding the cert, installing it, and binding it. So now that we have the config built out, I'm going to go ahead and try to deploy it. We're going to go to configuration job, and we're going to create a job, cert_LB. We're going to go ahead and drag the commands that we need. And these are the 8 relevant commands. And obviously, it's a smaller config that I'm working with. It's only 8 commands, but you can use this for as big as you need it to really do a very, very robust deployment. So I actually did the initial setup on 115. I'm actually going to do deployment on 157. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. We're going to preview rollback commands, but obviously add or remove, unbind, bind, or the rollback commands. Go ahead and hit next. And for this, in theory, if you have a maintenance window and you need to set up a load balancer, and your company doesn't allow you to actually set up load balancers or create anything during a work day, you got to do this at 2 in the morning. Automate everything, and it actually gives you the execution mode. So you can schedule this for 2 in the morning. And again, if you have Slack set up, you have email set up, you get an email alert or a Slack alert in your channel that things went through. I'm going to go ahead and do the deployment for now. Hit finish, and it actually builds out the load balancer, installs, and does everything for the cert for me. And if you need to actually check the details of the job, it'll show you that you're running at 100%. So some of the key takeaways here. Before doing any type of maintenance on ADM, before doing any type of upgrading or anything like that, do your backup, do your due diligence, create a backup on the node, download it to a jump box, create a snapshot, create a checkpoint, etc. When deploying ADM, follow the guides. So testing a lot of stuff, the guides are really spot on. If you deviate at step 4 and you try to jump to step 7 thinking you know what's going on, you're going to end up right back at step 4 because the guides are definitely spot on. They do work. They have been tested. So when you're doing your initial deployment, keep an eye on what's happening in the guide. Pooled licensing is going to give you the opportunity to actually save time when allocating a license to each node. It's going to give you visibility into what your node is using as far as bandwidth allocation. And again, Citrix ADM is a product. In addition to giving you insight into the health of your actual ADC SD-WAN infrastructure, it's going to give you user-side analytics. What's happening with your users? Say they're having latency, they're having issues logging in. It's going to give you insight into what's happening and provide you direction into troubleshooting and make it a little bit easier for you. And these are some of the resources. Obviously, we're going to start off with the system requirements and then upgrading, digging into no data, things like that. I think we're going to open it up for Q&A. Questions? We got product management here. If you guys have any questions, those are the best guys to answer them. If you want to download the slide presentation, use the bit.ly link or use the QR code, and you're able to download. When you say single hop and double hop, what do you mean? So you're talking about an ADC deployment. So when you say a double hop, so obviously the presentation is about ADM, but I mean, I can answer your question, but when you say a double hop, we got to specify, are you doing a true double hop? So an actual double hop in ADC is going to be gateway to gateway. Are you hopping gateway to gateway, or are you going gateway to load balancer? Because gateway to load balancer is not a double hop, you're simply load balancing. Yeah, so a double hop when you're doing an ADC build out is going to be gateway to gateway. It's not to say it's an uncommon deployment. We do see it all the time, but it's going to be environment specific. Yep. Yep. That, we may have to actually speak to customer service. I don't know if PM.
Talk a little loudly. I'm not actually from the product management. I'm from the engineering team on ADM. But I think the packs in which ADM licenses are sold are in increments of 10, right? And you could go to thousands of them, right? So we have customers who are deploying like 50,000 plus kind of web licenses.
One more time, if you don't use ADM. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll create reports about what's happening on the ADM or on the ADC. What are you looking for? More health statistics or analytics about users? Yeah, it'll provide you analytics about what's happening with the user side traffic. No, ADM will keep an eye on it for you. So if you set up a Slack channel, if you set up email alerts, ADM as a product will actually provide you with, you can set it up so you can actually get alerts about what's happening with your infrastructure. But the reporting feature itself, there's a tremendous amount of information that you can get. Notepad. So if you actually take DNS.conf, you open it up in Notepad++, you can actually take all those commands and you should be able to just drop it right in there. But it's going to be the same thing where you can actually edit it and then push it out. One more time? It's going to actually be the last slide. It's going to show you what ports need to be open to allow AppFlow to work. I think it's 4739 for AppFlow, or 4379.
22 for SSH, config jobs, and Nitro commands, 443, etc. So there is a list of, that's documented. Can I take? Okay, so the way I heard it is, can my configuration be living in a source control like a GitHub or something like that? Right. So there are two ways of doing the configuration in the ADM. So one of them, as Zahir actually talked about, is what we call as the config jobs, where there's a set of CLI commands. And then there is another templating system, which is what we call as a style books, right? So which is basically an abstracted way of deploying a configuration via a set of YAML files, right? That second part, the style books, could actually be residing in the GitHub along with the application code or anywhere, right? And ADM has connectors to on-prem or off-prem GitHub, right? Where it can pull in the style books and deploy it on the ADCs. Yeah, you can set it up. You can set it up to pull it automatically from GitHub. Okay. So typical use cases is like kind of deploying it infrastructure as a code. So when you're making your application code changes, right? As part of that, you might make a change on the, let's say, LB persistence method or whatever, right? And then deploy it on the ADC.
If there are any other questions, we'll be outside for a few minutes and we'll happily answer them for you.